Okay, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back for our screencast here on the American Revolution. So today we're going to be focusing on different social groups and how they're affected by the American Revolution. And so specifically we're going to focus on African Americans, Native Americans, and women. So we're going to start with African Americans. And so the first thing you want to understand is we're going to look at all these groups, what's going on during the American Revolution and what's going on after the American Revolution, kind of how they're impacted by this momentous event within American society. So during the American Revolution and after, what you want to keep in mind as far as African Americans are concerned is geography. Geography plays a significant role, whether they're in the New England region of America, the middle colonies, or the southern colonies. That's definitely going to dictate their role during the American Revolution. First question to keep in mind: were the majority of African Americans Tories, meaning loyalists, or were they Whigs, meaning patriots? And the answer to that question really depends on the region. If you look in your southern colonies, a lot of the slaves in the South tend to lean more towards the loyalist side. Why? Well, a couple of reasons. First, the British were offering this policy of if they slaves left their plantations and joined into the British Army, they would offer them their freedom at the end of the war. So you do have some, but not a lot of slaves who are going to leave their plantations to join the British Army. Now, what was the whole British policy here? It's not that they're morally opposed to slavery. The situation here is that they're trying to weaken the South's economy and they're trying to basically win the war. So you do have some slaves who are going to lean towards the loyalist side in the South. Now, the Continental Army makes no such offer in the South because they're afraid. They're afraid to arm slaves. They're afraid of a slave uprising. That's why they had such strict slave codes throughout the South. They don't offer any kind of incentive like that. Now, when you look to the North, though, it's a different story. There's a lot fewer slaves in the North, and so they will kind of offer incentives. So in a lot of cases, slave owners would kind of make the individual decision that if they were going to, if their slave joined to fight the patriot cause, they might offer them their freedom just for joining into the military. So in the North, specifically in New England, you'll see slaves lean more towards the patriot or the Whig cause. So it's interesting. It's a geographical dynamic. Now, this geographic dynamic is also going to kind of play out later, during the American Revolution and after it. So what you're going to see happen here is something very important, and it's going to have a big impact on our society because it really is going to divide the country all throughout the early 1800s. What you see happen during the American Revolution and after the American Revolution is that every single northern state in the new American Republic is going to abolish slavery. So the earliest ones start in the 1770s when the American Revolution breaks out in the late 1770s. So a lot during the 1780s, and the last two states to abolish slavery are going to be New York and New Jersey in 1799 and 1801 respectively. And so they all kind of abolished slavery after the American Revolution or in the wake of the American Revolution. Now, just as significant is that no southern state abolishes slavery. So nothing south of Pennsylvania is going to abolish slavery during the American Revolution or after the American Revolution. So, first question we have to ask ourselves is, why are the new northern states and the new American Republic abolishing the system of slavery? Well, it really has to do with the ideals behind the American Revolution and what's spelled out for Americans in the American Revolution. All those things that are written in the Declaration of Independence, the fact that we're fighting for our rights, and that all men are created equal, they understand how hypocritical that is. That they're saying all these things, and then they still have slaves, and there's still indentured servitude in parts of the colonies. They understand how hypocritical that is. And so they decide that if they're really going to kind of stand up to the ideals of the American Revolution, then they have to abolish slavery. And so they do. Now, the Southerners also understand this. The Southerners understand how hypocritical they're being. But what's the situation is in the South is that It's so economically intertwined into their society. They depend on the institution of slavery for their entire economy to function. It's all built off of a slave-based system. So in a lot of ways, economically, for the North, it's easy for them to say, this is hypocritical, let's get rid of slavery, because their economy does not depend on it. But if you look at the South, their economy does depend on it. And so as the North is abolishing slavery, the South is it's actually being strengthened. And this is going to be a big problem going forward in our country, because it's a huge issue that's going to divide Northerners and Southerners increasingly as the 1800s are going to move on. It increasingly divides the country because it's a huge issue between kind of our nation, and especially as we move westward and we acquire new territory as a country, it definitely becomes a huge issue within the nation. Now, the second thing you want to understand about how the North abolishes slavery. There's two different kinds of what we would call emancipation, and both are important. So you have something known as gradual emancipation and something known as immediate emancipation. The North is going to use a system of gradual emancipation to abolish slavery after the American Revolution. And what that means is that it's gradual over time. Immediate would mean like they pass the law abolishing slavery, and then every single slave is automatically free, like next day. The North doesn't do that. All of the northern states are going to use some system of gradual emancipation, which basically boiled down to in most states. If you were a slave over the age of 21, when they passed the new law abolishing slavery, you would be a slave for the rest of your life until you died. If you were under the age of 21, you will be a slave until you turn 21, and then you would get your freedom. So by doing it this way, it kind of like phases slavery out over time, and it's not kind of a sudden, distinct change. Why did they do it this way? They did it this way for economic purposes. They were afraid that if they abolished slavery all at one time, a lot of people's property and their fortunes might be ruined. And so like they wanted to transition to a free labor system over time. Now, is it morally cruel in a lot of ways, morally unjust? Absolutely. But they're thinking much more about sustaining the economic systems within their colonies and for their citizens than thinking about a lot of the moral aspects of how cruel that might be to somebody who is 22 years old, 23 years old, and they know slavery is abolished, but they have to be a slave now, for the rest of their life. All right. Now, the next group that we're going to talk about just briefly is going to be American Indians and their effect on, or the effect the American Revolution has on them. So when you look at American Indians, their role during the American Revolution, most Native Americans by this time are living west of the Appalachian Mountains and east of the Mississippi River, or at least the ones that we've been talking about up to this point. Most of them have been pushed out of the original territory of the 13 colonies, and so they're kind of stuck in this area in between what was Spanish territory and what's considered American territory. Now, when you look at who they might ally themselves with, they're going to ally themselves much more with the British than they would with the Americans. And the reason for that is they see the Americans or the British as a lesser of two evils. And think about the proclamation line of 1763. Americans in the backcountry were upset about this because they couldn't move westward. Indians, for example, on the other hand, would probably be happy about this situation because it's keeping the Americans who are extremely land hungry and want to push westward off of their territory and off of their land. And so they have different reasons for wanting to support the British. And so most of them will support the British. A lot of them stay out of the conflict entirely and don't get involved in it. Basically, very few will support the American cause. Now, after the war, the new American nation gains all of this territory. So everything east of the Mississippi River is now a part of the new American Republic, the new American United States. By doing that, we inherited all of these American Indians. So it brings up a lot of questions. First big question you want to think about. are American Indians going to be citizens in the new Republic of the United States? The answer to that question is no. And there's two reasons for why. One, the Americans, meaning what were formerly the American colonists, the white settlers, do not want the Native Americans or the American Indians to be citizens in their new country. But also, which a lot of people forget, is that American Indians have no desire to be citizens within the new American Republic either. They don't want to be citizens. So neither side wants them to be included in this new American Republic. So I think that's a very important thing to understand. Now, it brings up a second question though. So if they're living in this territory, they're living under the territory of the United States, but they're not American citizens. They don't participate in our republic. They don't participate in the state governments. What is their status? Um, and so this is a very interesting situation. What's going to happen is American Indians and their different tribes, they're going to get to keep their tribal territories. This is a later map showing you reservations, but they keep their tribal territories here east of the Mississippi River and like states like what becomes Illinois, Indiana, Kentucky, Tennessee. They keep their tribal lands, their traditional tribal lands. And the American government, the new American government, treats them in some ways like a foreign country, in some ways kind of like a part of the domestic sphere of America. So they become known as what's called domestic dependent nations, which means they are within the borders of America, our country, um, but they're not citizens of the nation, and in a lot of ways they're treated like a foreign country. So the American government will sign treaties with individual Native American tribes, uh, and in certain cases, later in American history, we fight wars against different Native American tribes. So in one way, they're within the boundaries, technically, of America, but in some ways, they have their own distinctions. They're their own countries, and kind of governed by their own rules. So this is a very interesting situation, and something that's pretty unique to America. And we have a system similar to it today, but it's a little bit different, known as the reservation system out in the western part. A lot of the reservations are out in the western part of the United States, and they're still what you would consider domestic dependent nations. So we'll get into this a little bit later in our class when we talk about like Indian removal and Andrew Jackson and how like the reservation system was created out in the western part of the United States. All right, the last thing that we're going to discuss briefly is kind of women and their role in the American Revolution and the effect that it had. So the first thing you want to keep in mind, uh, during colonial time period and early American history, there are very distinct spheres in American society as far as gender roles are concerned. There's definitely a belief that there's a man sphere in society and a woman sphere in society. A man sphere is politics and working outside of the home. The woman sphere is domestic, taking care of the children, and kind of running a lot of the internal domestic affairs and taking care of the family within society. So they definitely believe in having distinct gender roles. Now, during the American Revolution, you start to see a pattern in American history that women take on a little bit more of an extended role during wartime periods, and each successive war, they get a bigger and bigger role in American society. And so in the American Revolution, it's small, like they take over financial situations and financial systems, like knowing more about the household affairs. But in later wars, like say World War II, World War I, they're going to take on a much bigger role working outside of the home. Now, after the war, what you want to keep in mind is they keep the same idea. This does not dramatically change social ideas and kind of dramatically change women's role in society. They still believe very strongly in different separate gender roles and different spheres. But they're going to kind of extend the women's domestic duties to include something known as Republican motherhood, which is a very important term. So this idea of Republican motherhood means that not only do women have to teach their children like religious values, morally what's right and wrong, but they also have to teach them about the values of being an American citizen. What does it mean to be an American in a republic? Teach them the ideals of the American Revolution, all of the political beliefs and values that the founding fathers fought for. They're going to kind of give this very important duty to teaching this to children to women. Okay, so I'll see you guys